How do you think the off-label market for MDMA will work? Can it work? Hey everyone, welcome to our latest TDR Psychedelic Exclusive. Big guest here today as we welcome back. It's been about a month since on. Yes, the industry's been hit hard over this past month, but still some encouraging news with MAPS's data coming out from 5 weeks ago, but it's been relatively quiet. So is the market missing something? Let's find out as we welcome in. He is the CEO of Numinus Wellness, which trades on the TSX under the ticker symbol NUMI. Payton Nyquvest back to the podcast. Hope you're doing well. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
And had a new baby, I heard
I
last
did.
time. So congrats.
I did. Thank you.
Boy, girl?
Baby girl.
Baby?
Yeah.
How big?
She was a little one, 6 pounds 1 ounce. So
Wow.
yeah.
So is mom and new baby girl getting any sleep?
I always we had this with our first one, and I'm always careful to say this to other parents that are out there, but we're all probably we're sleeping more than I would care to admit, because there's a lot of parents out there that probably don't get nearly as
So you
much
got
sleep.
lucky.
But,
I've heard stories where
I don't
if
want to
you're
jinx it. So I'm grateful. Yeah.
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 Well, I hear stories that if your first child is a nightmare when it comes to sleep, you've earned your stripes. The second one usually sleeps through. Or if your first one sleeps well, then the second one definitely
Well,
throws some curveball.
this is what scares me, because our first one was like a black belt sleeper. So
That's amazing.
I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we can go 2 for 2 here and maybe buck the trend a little bit.
Not bad.
We'll see.
Well, I know busy time for you right now. It's been about 5 weeks since MAPS came out with their data. But before we get into that, interesting announcement from the FDA last week, recently warning patients about healthcare providers, but the potential risks of ketamine products, including oral formulations for the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Why do you think the FDA has come out at this time and issued this?
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about at-home use of ketamine, and look, there's lots of data on this. Ketamine it's frankly the only psychedelic that we have data for that has the potential for abuse. And
Good point.
I
Good
think
point.
through COVID, there were, and we've, again, not something we haven't talked about, but regulations changed uniquely through COVID, where you were allowed to prescribe for scheduled drugs virtually. And that kind of opened the door for this virtual administration of ketamine, right? And I think in certain
Red flags
instances,
everywhere. Red flags everywhere already. Abuse at
100%.
home. Yeah,
A
go on.
hundred percent.
Sorry.
And look, like, these are as we've talked about, these are very, very powerful tools that,
Yeah.
require facilitation, require education, and require support. It's like, I always akin it to, it's like, imagine if I mailed you a scalpel and said, go do brain surgery on
Yeah.
yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I know they're not the same thing, but if we think about what the impact of just talking about ketamine assisted therapy, but if we talk about what the potential positive impact for ketamine assisted therapy is, it's akin to a serious intervention, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the FDA is being smart. It was something that we assumed for quite some time, and there were regulations that got converted back, kind of in a hopefully post-COVID environment, where you've now had to do more in-person stuff. And we've always stayed to our philosophy with ketamine assisted therapy, is that it should be done in person with therapy.
Yes.
Again, there are certain cases we even have in Numinus where what we'll do is, if you're somebody who has been in for treatment for some time and you've shown that you know how to work with these compound, and how the sort of protocol and parameters around it, then on a case by case basis we may offer somebody at home ketamine use, but it's not widely dispersed. And I think the way that it was sort of getting taken advantage of in the US, and I think it detracts from the importance of therapy. And you mentioned the MAPS numbers, which we can talk about, but I think a couple of very important takeaways from the second phase 3 readouts that didn't get appropriate amount of attention was the importance of a therapeutic container. So it's nothing that we hadn't assumed, and frankly, it's really good to see.
Yeah, I think this is just an announcement to say, look, this is like when you've seen the amount of abuse with opioids, it's really people. Some of these, as I said to you last time, some of these Netflix series have really shed a light on what the current situation is. People driving in their cars to different states where it's easier to obviously be prescribed for walk-in clinics. I think they're putting a halt to this right now because, as you said, ketamine could be substance abuse related to that specific compound. But it goes
Yeah.
to show, I think, that if and when we do see MDMA approved, you're going to have to go through the proper protocols, meaning MDMA's, MAPS's MDMA protocols, and through a clinical model, because they're not about to, you know, have the opioid crisis times two, if that makes
Mhm.
sense, when it comes to
Mhm.
substance use disorder, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and two things on that. One, even if you think about what ketamine does, you think about someone getting behind the wheel of a car with a ketamine nasal spray in their car. It's a dissociative. It, it's used as a dissociative anesthetic in emergency rooms, right? Like
Yeah.
we we just have to be cautious.
Yeah.
And I agree. I think the FDA is making a smart move by trying to get ahead of any potential
Yeah.
uh, problems that might occur. And
One
look,
thing I
like humans are going to do human things, right? We it just is what it is. So
They don't wanna make things worse than what they are right now, but I think the idea of, as I said, at the forefront, which is about training therapists, getting the proper amount of therapists involved, and then, you're seeing, we've had Cody Chandra and Joe Caltabiano on about building the overall infrastructure and the, REIT pertaining to therapy, or I should say clinics across the US. So, beginning stages, but the proper, I think, protocols are being put into place to obviously build and scale up the overall industry. I will note too that this warning by the FDA does exclude Spravato's nasal spray, which is the only approved ketamine-based drug for mental health conditions. Looking at the latest numbers, you and I actually talked about this off camera. Year to date, $483 million in revenue, and projected to finish around just below 650 million by year's end. So clearly, this is I think this is beating all expectations for the amount of revenue it's generated, really, in its first full fiscal year of sales.
100%. And I think there's a lot of conversation right now around kind of commercial viability of psychedelic therapy. I think it's been hugely successful. And if you think about, as we think towards the future, you think about MDMA, you think about psilocybin. I think the important thing to remember with ketamine, and I mean, we see this in the clinics. The ketamine drug product market is a very busy one. Like we do a lot of Spravato,
Yeah,
but frankly, there's whether it's IM ketamine lozenges, off-label ketamine use, like there's lots of other ketamine products that are out there. And to see the success of Spravato in the face of that, I think shows how big the demand is. And unfortunately, we don't have kind of consolidated off-label ketamine therapy numbers at the moment. But I think it shows not only the size of the demand, but at least from what we see in the clinics, the efficacy. We see a
yeah.
huge amount of success for people coming in for a number of different indications that are getting success from these treatments.
How do you think the off-label market for MDMA will work? Can it work?
I don't think so. I think it's a completely different environment, right? Ketamine was originally
Right.
it was already approved to be used in hospitals, as we said, as a anesthetic, and then kind of made its way into mental health treatments. Whereas the MDMA and the MDMA protocol is again, we've talked lots about this, but
I know.
it's the MAPS protocol, the drug plus therapy, that is
Here's an
getting approved.
MDMA pill. Here's a MAPS MDMA pill. This MDMA pill, not legalized or
Correct.
prescribed. It's
Correct.
MAPS MDMA, right?
Correct. Correct. And the protocol associated with that, right?
Yeah.
And and so with that, I think the other big thing too is when you think about reimbursement, right? Like this will be the big kind of limiting factor is there's lots of reimbursement for Spravato, right? And but it's also, there's lots of people that are willing to pay out of pocket for different administrations of ketamine because it's, sometimes in the hundreds of dollars sort of, it's a less resource intensive investment.
Right.
MDMA therapy is going to be expensive if you have to pay out of pocket, right?
Yes.
It's lots of therapy, two therapists, drug integration, preparation. And so with MAPS getting FDA approval, then there should be full reimbursement for the MAPS protocol, right? And that will be.
I'm hearing stories though, as far as insurance coverage. Like, are you hearing stuff that insurance coverage will only provide the first hour? Like, how do you get around a therapy that's 68 hours? Is that ludicrous?
I've never
Just
heard
a
that. I've never heard
okay.
that before.
Okay. All right.
That doesn't. We get reimbursement for the therapy of Spravato that's longer than an hour. The, the FDA is approving what they're approving. I don't understand why.
So even if a 6 to 8 hour session were to take place, you're going to get full coverage regardless if you're there for 6 to 8 hours. It's not
Yeah,
like the cover.
that's what the
Yeah.
FDA has approved, right?
Cut.
Yeah. It's
Makes sense.
I think I get people are still trying to orient themselves around mental health reimbursement, but you
Yes.
think about like people who get reimbursement for a surgery, right? Surgery can be 12
Good point.
hours plus, and there's lots of different reimbursement opportunities for those types of procedures. So you need to
Yeah.
think of it as the same sort of thing, right? It's an intervention reimbursement. And as we've talked about, right, you look at the numbers on PTSD. The average person suffering with diagnosed PTSD is a $20,000 a year
As you and I have
cost to the
discussed.
healthcare system. You're talking about a $12,000 treatment that has curative intent and numbers to back that up. So almost half of the annual cost to completely cure someone of PTSD and alleviate that off of the healthcare system.
Save money and a possible solution, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
Let's switch now. Current state of the industry. Frustrating to say the least, I think, for a lot of investors. It's been about 5 weeks to set off the top since MAP released their, groundbreaking data, and it was groundbreaking. Many investors thinking this would kick off, I think, a robust news cycle. However, the complete opposite has happened. It's been really quiet since then. So, what do you make of this right now? Like, is the market missing something? Like, were you thinking that there could be more like a frequent news cycle, or it's just wait and see right now?
I don't even think it's necessarily new. Look, we're in the most challenging market that I've ever seen. I think more challenging than 2008. It's just really, really tough out there. And,
Yeah,
every time you think, nothing else can happen, now we're in this week and unfortunately, seeing what's happening over in Israel, it is a very
I agree.
challenging market. And, psychedelics fall very far on the risk spectrum
Yep.
of investments, right? And so I think we're just stuck in that at the moment, and it's really industry agnostic. Everybody that I talk to who is on the sort of banking side all say the same thing. You look at IPOs done in Canada. I think there's been one or two listings this
Quiet.
year. Yeah, it's very, very tight, quiet. Capital is really tight. And I think looking at, obviously, watching the performance of Compass, right? I think Compass operates as sort of like the bellwether for the space. They raise a bunch of money at nine and a half bucks in the summertime. Stocks trading under $6, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's unfortunately a really hard time. The other side of that and the sort of industry side of that, as you said, nothing but really, really positive momentum in the space. I think you look at the MAPS numbers, they're on a kind of defined timeline now to approval. You've got, I think the Cybin and small pharma merger was a really, really good one. I think that puts, some of those products on a much clearer pathway.
Yeah.
You've got Compass in their phase 3 at the moment. So lots of good things happening, lots of regulatory support and changes happening, continues to be, talked about everywhere. It's just a tough market.
Yeah.
There's no real way around it.
Yeah. I hear you there. I think too, like you said, it's just like you brought up Compass. Cybin actually had a little bit of a run, obviously, with Steve Cohen and his firm purchasing, what was it, 18.95 million shares of the company. It's pretty much, and then the buyout of obviously it took over Mindset, but it's been relatively flat since those announcements have been made, even though we saw a little bit of a run. But, with MAPS, obviously, is the market missing something, even though in challenging times, or you just think it's just flat out because they're
I
just
think
distracted right now with everything?
Yeah, I think people are just distracted. I think capital is and when I say capital, I just mean like people and their money is just a lot of people are just holding on right now. I've continued to see even tax loss season from my vantage point has kind of started in October, so I think you're kind of in the midst of that at the
Yeah.
moment, and there's just there's a lot of uncertainty out there right now,
Yeah.
and I think that's it. I don't think it's easy to say numbers are great, market's missing something. I think there's nobody that I talk to that really questions whether this is whether approval is going to happen or not, or whether these treatments are effective, or and my phone daily goes off with people who are either telling me anecdotal stories, or heard an anecdotal story, or looking for support. So I think it's all there. We just need the market to
I hear you there.
bring some
I think you're
confidence back into it. So
you're 100% right there. I see it in multiple, like a lot of merging industries. It's like on the priority scale, it gets pushed back a little, but at the end of the day, it's just about the waiting game. I do want to bring up, what was it, 2, 3 weeks ago, you announced an at the market program. So
mhm.
you have said, and a few investors have reached out to us to say, okay, you've mentioned in previous podcasts that you were fully funded as a company all the way up until potentially mid-year next year for when it's slated that the FDA could approve MDMA. But since then, you announced an at the market program. So what's changed? How should investors interpret this? And why does it make sense, I guess, to do this now?
Yeah, I think that and in the US, ATMs are kind of standard practice, a little bit less standard practice up in Canada. But I think a couple things to clarify, because I saw some comments on this as well. Um, the ATM is a tool that you put in place to just have good financial hygiene. It is something that Numinus is in control of, not the sponsoring bank. I think that was something that I saw get a little bit confused as well.
So you have full control versus
We
Stifel.
we are the ones who decide whether to turn the tap on or off, right?
Okay.
And
And it obviously doesn't make sense to turn the tap on at these prices right now.
no, it's just a tool to have in the toolbox. And I think for investors, and I think I consider I'm personally the largest shareholder of Numinus. I've never sold a share. I've only bought shares, and the company's intentions are aligned with investors as well. Um, an ATM from a dilution standpoint, kind of like good practice, if the ATM were ever to be turned on, always stay less than 10% of the daily trading volume, so that it
Okay.
doesn't hurt share prices. From a fees perspective, if the average financing, if you do even a bought deal or marketed deal, it's like 6-7% commission that you have to pay on a deal. ATMs are like 2% fee,
Okay.
and they're done at market price. All financings, bought deal, private placement, or otherwise, are always done at a discount. So this is a vehicle to be able to raise money if and when we need to, at market, at way less fees. in a way that doesn't just, it's not a one-time big dilution factor potentially. So
I think that's the perception, I think, amongst investors. When they think of at the market, people start to, panic because
yeah,
they're basically announced at discounted prices, right?
100%. And so no discounted prices at the market, much cheaper vehicle, and a much safer way if and when, or if capital was needing to be raised and the volume was there. I think from an investor standpoint, the other thing to keep into consideration, as we've talked about, lots of big catalysts to come over the next little bit. I think we're bouncing on the bottom, and you should see, hopefully things improve here over the coming couple of months. And if and when volumes do improve, and liquidity picks up and share prices pick up, there's a tool there to be able to continue to stretch out, the runway. And if we need to raise capital, an opportunity to leverage that's a lot better for investors, and keeps, the big banks looking to shop bought deals the second the market turns, which we've
Yeah,
seen time and time again, right? So it's just good financial hygiene, a good thing to have, stated in the prospectus, and as we've talked about, something that, as we look towards a potential US listing.
I was going to say, does
Yeah.
this enable you to see who's buying now?
Well, that's the other thing too, is it does give us a lot deeper levels of visibility into the trading of the stock, which was a part of the intention around that too. And just the final thing on that, as we've continued to get prepared for a larger US listing, it's things that the Nasdaq likes to see.
How aggressive are you pursuing that as far as a NASDAQ listing?
We've done all the heavy lifting, all of the sort of legal work associated with that, which is a undertaking,
Okay.
and now just kind of waiting for the market. I think, unfortunately, in the psychedelic space, we've seen um, not great timing on a couple big US listings, where you really only get one shot at
Agreed.
that kind of a move, and you want to make sure it's done when things are pointed, in the right direction. There's momentum there, there's an audience there, and you can capitalize on it, right? The US markets are not cheap. They're a lot more expensive to operate in the US than in Canada. So you got to be able to utilize it, leverage it for all that it can offer, but make sure that the timing is right too.
Yeah, makes sense. Last thing I'll leave, like last time we spoke to you, you seemed pretty excited about some of the things, and I know you can't comment on this, nor am I looking for you to do this, but it sounded like based off of like Maps's latest data announcements or readouts, I should say, there was a lot of positive momentum building and stuff that you were working on behind the scenes. So do you see a lot of that momentum still building behind the scenes? Just like I said, it's just a matter of some things are out of the control right now. Am I
Yeah,
understanding that correctly? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. You look, there's a really exciting, continued exciting path that Maps is on, and the things that we've talked about that we know are very, very necessary. Training, we've talked about, sort of clinics and infrastructure, and just going back, because I continue to hear this kind of narrative around, virtual versus in person, and
Yeah.
and is that going to be sustainable? And I think I brought this up before. You look at the placebo numbers on the second phase 3 results from Maps, right? Placebo, for anybody who doesn't know, is placebo is you're essentially just getting the therapy, and you're getting, call it a sugar pill, thinking that it's MDMA. Still, I think it was about a 70% success rate for people who got the placebo. So what that shows is the importance of therapy and in-person therapy. There is no virtual model for MDMA. We're not mailing, ecstasy to people's houses. It's not the way that this is going to go. And
Agreed.
the importance of therapy is absolutely crucial to the success of what we're seeing in the research.
Yeah. Well, when's your date for your earnings?
End of November.
End of November. So that'll be something that people will be watching relatively closely. You've made a few announcements, pertaining to your burn rate. I think we talked about that last time, but you had mentioned too just the online therapy that's going on, the courses and everything. That's still going strong.
Really well. Yeah, really, really well. People are starting to get for training. People are starting to get prepared. Right. You're seeing sort of the light at the end of the approval tunnel, and not only that, but you're seeing Oregon, Colorado. You've seen positive momentum happen in California. A lot of just positive sentiment out there. So if you put the blinders on the market and just remember the industry is looking at this as like, okay, there's significant innovation coming into mental health care that hasn't happened
Yeah.
in 50, 60 years, and the results are staggering.
Yeah. One last thing I'll bring up, and I know we talked about this before, and again, I'll ask again. You made the announcement. I think you cut it. There was about $1 million in annual revenue costs based on the announcement from last month. So it works out to be about $250,000 per quarter.
Yep.
Your burn rate last we checked was a couple of $1 million per month. People still asking and wondering like, how does that add up math wise to like getting the burn rate in check? What would your response be to them?
Yeah, we've continued to dramatically reduce the burn rate. We've made announcements about that. Continued to stretch out the timeline as much as humanly possible, and see a really clear line of sight around the as we've talked about, the opportunities for the business that we have without any expansion, being profitable, and that's what we've continued to really push hard towards. We're taking a very measured approach to that.
Yeah.
Just seeing the challenges that are out there at the moment, and making sure, frankly, that we're also offering services and a combination of services that are insurance reimbursed, that are accessible for people. We know everybody is feeling hard times financially at the moment. It's tough out there. So
That's an understatement.
so we want to continue to make sure that we're offering services that are financially accessible to as many people as possible.
You know those big jug of like dish soaps you get at the end of the aisle at a Costco?
Yeah.
There was a guy that posted a video earlier this year that was like $6.99. And they say how inflation's up 5 to 7%. He went in last week, posted the same price, which was 7 months later, $16.99. $16.99.
Hmm.
So needless to say, it's like people's everyday life and what they can and can't afford. Like I see a lot of people really following closely, like, their grocery bills and stuff like that. But anyway, it's interesting times we're living in right now. But listen, I know there's a lot of investors that wanted to ask again, just about upcoming earnings. Obviously, you can't comment on that, but what can you anticipate the remainder of this year? Yes, it's been relatively quiet since the MAPS readouts, but still a lot of the stuff that you're working on behind the scenes remains strong. You're reiterating that the burn rate is indeed getting in line. And most importantly, the reason why you announced the ATM when you did, right?
Yep, exactly.
All right, sir. Well, I appreciate the update. And as usual, great chatting with you. And more importantly, let's keep in touch.
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
So what'd you all think of the interview? Did you like what we recorded with our guests? Then leave a comment below and let us know what you thought of it. And if there's any more questions you want us to ask, as usual, share this video with your network. Click on that bell for all notifications. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel because we would not be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.